I stand before you today to talk about something we all wrestle with: control. Life has a way of testing us, doesn't it? We plan, we push, we pull, trying to mold every piece of the puzzle. But let me tell you something, sometimes you've got to stop trying to play the role of the director and let the creator write the script. Let go. That's a tough pill to swallow, because in our minds, letting go feels like giving up, like failure. But it's not. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's saying, God, I trust you more than I trust myself. Think about this. How many times have we tried to control something only to end up more frustrated, more lost, more broken? We dig our heels into the ground, clutching tightly to things we were never meant to hold. That relationship that's tearing you apart, that job that's draining your soul, that dream you've been chasing for so long you've forgotten why you started. Sometimes the breakthrough you're praying for is waiting on you to let go. Now, when I say let go, I don't mean sit back and do nothing. Trusting God doesn't mean you stop working. It means you stop worrying. It means you work with faith, knowing that when you've done your part, God will do his. It means stepping out of your own way and letting him make a way. You see, when we cling to our plans, we close our hands. And how can you receive anything from God with closed hands? But when you let go, you make room for blessings that are bigger than what you could have imagined. I know what you're thinking, but what if it doesn't work out? Let me tell you something, God's plan will always work out. It might not look like what you expected. It might not happen when you wanted it, but trust me, it will be right on time and better than you dreamed. The Bible tells us in Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That's not a suggestion, that's a command. Because when you lean on your understanding, you lean on limits. But when you lean on God, you lean on the infinite. Letting go is not giving up, it's trusting God's greater plan. This concept may sound simple in words, but becomes challenging in practice, especially when we are so deeply intertwined with our desire to control outcomes, timelines, and circumstances. Many of us grow up believing that success in life comes solely from our efforts, our planning, and our ability to foresee challenges and prepare for them. While there is truth in the value of hard work and preparation, there is also a profound spiritual truth we often overlook. There are moments in life when our strength, our intelligence, and our planning are simply not enough. These moments aren't meant to break us, they are meant to remind us of the one who holds the ultimate plan. Letting go is a process that requires humility. It requires acknowledging that we are not in control and that no matter how hard we try, there are factors beyond our grasp. This is not easy because it goes against the grain of human nature. We crave control because it gives us a sense of security. When we feel like we are in control, we feel capable of predicting and managing outcomes. But the truth is, control is often an illusion. Life is unpredictable, and no amount of planning can account for every twist and turn. Letting go then becomes a courageous act of faith. It is the recognition that we are limited, but God is limitless, and that his plan is not only greater, but also far better than anything we could design for ourselves. When we hold on tightly to our own plans, we often do so out of fear of failure, fear of disappointment, or fear of the unknown. Fear convinces us that if we let go, everything will fall apart. But here's the paradox: the more we cling, the more we struggle, and the further we drift from peace. Letting go, on the other hand, is not about abandoning our responsibilities or resigning ourselves to hopelessness. It's about releasing our need to control every detail and surrendering to God's wisdom and sovereignty. It's saying, God, I trust that you see what I can't see. I trust that you know what I don't know. And I trust that your plans for me are good, even when I don't understand them. Trusting God's greater plan requires us to shift our perspective. What looks like a setback to us may be a setup for something better. What feels like a closed door may be God's way of steering us toward a path that leads to greater blessings. When we let go, we give God room to work in ways that surpass our imagination. We stop limiting his power with our narrow vision and start walking in faith, believing that he is working all things together for our good. This kind of trust is not blind. It is rooted in the character of God, who is faithful, loving, and unchanging. Letting go also invites us to live in the present moment. When we are consumed with controlling the future, we often miss the beauty and lessons of the present. God is always at work in our lives, but if we're too busy trying to orchestrate our plans, we may overlook his fingerprints on our current circumstances. Letting go allows us to see his hand more clearly. It reminds us that our worth and success are not determined by our ability to control outcomes, but by our willingness to trust him. It teaches us that peace comes not from having everything figured out, but from knowing that God is in control. Letting go doesn't mean we stop dreaming or working hard. It doesn't mean we abandon our goals or become passive in the face of challenges. Rather, it means we hold our plans loosely, recognizing that God's plans may differ from ours and trusting that his are better. It means we remain faithful in our efforts while leaving the results to him. This balance between effort and surrender is where true peace and freedom are found. It's where we realize that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders because God has already carried it for us. One of the greatest barriers to letting go is our attachment to how we think life should unfold. We have expectations about our careers, relationships, health, and future. When life doesn't go according to our expectations, we often feel disappointed, frustrated, or even angry at God. But letting go means releasing those expectations and trusting that God's plan is not only different, but better. It means believing that his detours are divine and that his delays are purposeful. It means trusting that he is not just the God of the destination, but also the God of the journey. Letting go is not a one-time decision, it's a daily practice. Every day we are faced with situations that challenge our faith and test our trust in God. Every day we must choose to surrender our fears, our doubts, and our desire for control. This daily act of letting go is what strengthens our faith and deepens our relationship with God. It reminds us that we are not alone, that we are held by a God who loves us more than we can comprehend. It teaches us to depend on him, not just for the big things, but also for the small, everyday moments. The beauty of letting go is that it leads to freedom. When we release our grip on the things we cannot control, we are free to focus on what truly matters. We are free to love, to serve, to grow, and to live with joy. We are free to embrace the present moment and to trust that the future is in God's hands. We are free to rest in the assurance that we don't have to have all the answers because God does. Letting go is not giving up, it's an act of courage and faith. It's a declaration that we trust God more than we trust ourselves, that we believe in his promises, and that we are willing to surrender our plans for the sake of his greater purpose. It's not about abandoning hope, but about placing our hope in the one who never fails. Letting go is not about losing control, but about gaining peace, knowing that the God who created the universe is the same God who holds our lives in his hands. Trusting God means working with faith, not worrying. It's a principle that challenges our natural instincts because as humans, we often equate action with control. We believe that the harder we push, the more likely we are to achieve the outcomes we desire. But trusting God is not about abandoning effort, it's about aligning our effort with faith and surrendering the results to him. It's a mindset that transforms how we approach challenges, setbacks, and the uncertainties of life. When we think about trust, it often feels passive, like something that happens in the background while we focus on tangible actions. But trusting God is anything but passive. It's active and intentional. It requires us to work diligently with the skills, resources, and opportunities God has given us, while also releasing our grip on the need to control every detail of the process. This balance is where faith becomes real. Faith without action is stagnant. But action without faith can lead to exhaustion and frustration. Trusting God bridges the gap between these two extremes. Worry is one of the greatest obstacles to trusting God. Worry consumes our thoughts, drains our energy, and creates a false sense of control. We think that if we dwell on a problem long enough, we can solve it. But worry doesn't solve problems, it magnifies them. It makes small issues seem insurmountable and blinds us to the solutions that are already within our reach. Trusting God requires us to let go of worry and replace it with prayer, faith, and action. When we worry, we're essentially saying, I don't trust that God can handle this. But when we trust, we acknowledge that He is bigger than our circumstances and that His plans are greater than our fears. Working with faith means understanding that our effort is a partnership with God, not a substitute for Him. We plant the seeds, but God brings the growth. We make the plans, but God directs the steps. This partnership requires humility because it reminds us that we are not the source of our success, God is. It also requires perseverance because faith is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice. Every day we must choose to trust God even when the path ahead is unclear. Every day we must choose to act in faith, knowing that our efforts, guided by His hand, will yield the best outcomes. There's a profound sense of peace that comes from working with faith instead of worrying. When we trust God, we release the need to have all the answers and to predict every outcome. We recognize that our role is to do our part and leave the rest to Him. This doesn't mean we avoid responsibility or ignore the challenges before us. On the contrary, it means we approach our responsibilities with a sense of purpose and confidence, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. It means we face challenges with the assurance that we are not alone and that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. Trusting God transforms the way we view setbacks and obstacles. Without faith, setbacks can feel like failures and obstacles can seem like insurmountable barriers. But with faith, we see them differently. We see setbacks as opportunities for growth and obstacles as opportunities for God to show His power. We learn to trust that even when things don't go according to our plans, they are still part of God's plan. This trust allows us to keep moving forward even when the path is difficult, because we know that God is working all things together for our good. Faith is not a shield that protects us from challenges, but it is a source of strength that carries us through them. When we work with faith, we approach our task with a sense of hope and expectation. We believe that our efforts, when aligned with God's will, are never in vain. This belief motivates us to keep going, even when the results are not immediately visible. It reminds us that the seeds we plant today may take time to grow, but they will bear fruit in God's perfect timing. Worry, on the other hand, paralyzes us. It keeps us stuck in a cycle of doubt and fear, unable to take meaningful action. When we worry, we focus on what could go wrong instead of what God can do. We become so consumed with trying to avoid failure that we miss the opportunities God has placed before us. Trusting God frees us from this cycle. It shifts our focus from our limitations to His limitless power. It reminds us that our success is not dependent on our ability to control every detail, but on our willingness to follow His lead. Working with faith also changes the way we measure success. In a world that often equates success with outcomes, trusting God teaches us to value obedience and faithfulness above all else. Success is not just about achieving our goals, it's about walking in alignment with God's will. It's about being faithful with what He has entrusted to us and trusting Him with the rest. This perspective allows us to celebrate progress, even when the final outcome is still uncertain. It reminds us that every step of faith, no matter how small, is significant in God's eyes. Trusting God is not always easy, especially when we face uncertainty or challenges that seem overwhelming. It requires us to step out of our comfort zones and to take risks that we cannot fully control. But this is where faith grows. It grows in the moments when we choose to trust God instead of giving in to worry. It grows in the moments when we act in faith, even when we don't see immediate results. It grows in the moments when we let go of our need for control and surrender to God's greater plan. This kind of trust is not something we can muster on our own. It comes from spending time with God, reading His Word, and experiencing His faithfulness in our lives. The more we get to know God, the more we trust Him. The more we see His hand at work in our lives, the more we are willing to let go of worry and embrace faith. Trusting God is a journey, and every step of that journey brings us closer to Him. Working with faith, not worrying, is a daily choice. It's a choice to believe that God is who He says He is and that He will do what He has promised. It's a choice to act in obedience, even when we don't understand His plan. It's a choice to focus on His faithfulness instead of our fears. This choice is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It leads to a life of purpose, peace, and fulfillment, a life that reflects the goodness and greatness of God. Closed hands can't receive blessings, release control. This idea may seem straightforward, but its depth challenges us to rethink the way we approach life and its uncertainties. As human beings, we naturally seek to hold on to what we have, grasping tightly to our plans, possessions, and relationships, believing that by doing so we can secure our happiness and guarantee our future. Yet this instinct to hold on often becomes the very thing that prevents us from experiencing the fullness of God's blessings. Releasing control is not a sign of weakness or defeat. It is a declaration of trust in the one who knows all, sees all, and holds all things together. When we keep our hands closed, we limit ourselves to what we can hold on our own. Imagine holding a handful of sand. The tighter you clench your fist, the more the grains slip through your fingers. The same is true with life's blessings. The tighter we hold on to our plans, possessions, or expectations, the more we lose sight of the bigger picture that God has prepared for us. Closed hands symbolize fear of losing what we have, fear of the unknown, fear of failure. But fear is not from God. Fear keeps us bound, while trusting God sets us free to experience His abundance. Releasing control is an act of faith. It is acknowledging that our ways are limited, but God's ways are limitless. We can only see a small piece of the puzzle, but God sees the entire picture. When we try to control every aspect of our lives, we confine ourselves to the boundaries of our understanding and ability. But when we let go and open our hands, we make space for God to work in ways that go beyond our imagination. This act of surrender is not about giving up, it is about giving over. It is about saying, God, I trust you more than I trust myself. I trust your plans more than my own. Closed hands also represent a scarcity mindset, the belief that what we have is all there is, and that if we let go, we may not get it back. But God is a God of abundance. His blessings are not finite or limited. He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think. When we release control, we position ourselves to receive the blessings that God has already prepared for us. We shift from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance, trusting that God's provision is always enough. There is a story in the Bible about a rich young ruler who came to Jesus asking what he must do to inherit eternal life. Jesus told him to sell all he had, give to the poor, and follow him. The young man walked away sorrowful because he was unwilling to let go of his possessions. His closed hands kept him from receiving the greater blessing that Jesus was offering. This story is a powerful reminder that clinging to what we have can cause us to miss out on what God wants to give us. It challenges us to examine what we are holding on to so tightly that it prevents us from fully trusting God. Releasing control does not mean we stop caring or stop trying. It means we stop striving in our own strength and start relying on God's strength. It means we do our part and leave the rest to Him. It means we trust that even when things don't go according to our plans, they are still part of God's plan. This trust allows us to face life's uncertainties with peace and confidence, knowing that God is in control. One of the reasons we struggle to release control is because we fear the unknown. We want to see the entire path before we take the first step. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith is about taking the first step, even when we can't see the whole staircase. It is about trusting that God will guide us one step at a time. When we keep our hands closed, we are essentially saying, I don't trust that God can provide for me or guide me. But when we open our hands, we say, God, I trust you to lead me, provide for me, and bless me in ways I cannot even imagine. Letting go of control also requires us to let go of our expectations. Often we have a specific idea of how we want our lives to unfold, and when things don't go according to our expectations, we feel disappointed or frustrated. But God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. His plans for us are good, even when they don't align with our plans. Releasing control means surrendering our expectations and trusting that God's plan is better than anything we could plan for ourselves. When we open our hands, we not only position ourselves to receive blessings, but we also become a blessing to others. Closed hands hold tightly to what we have, but open hands give freely. When we release control, we reflect God's generosity and abundance. We become conduits of his blessings, allowing them to flow through us to those around us. This act of giving, whether it's our time, resources, or talents, is an act of trust that God will continue to provide for us as we pour into others. Releasing control is not something that comes naturally. It is a choice we must make daily. Every day we are faced with situations that tempt us to hold on tightly to our plans, our possessions, our relationships. Every day we must choose to trust God instead of clinging to control. This choice is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It leads to a life of peace, freedom, and fulfillment, a life that is open to receiving the fullness of God's blessings. Trusting God requires us to remember his faithfulness. When we look back on our lives, we can see the ways he has provided for us, guided us, and blessed us, even in situations where we didn't understand what he was doing at the time. These moments remind us that God is trustworthy and that we can release control because he is in control. They remind us that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that his plans for us are always for our good. When we release control, we experience a sense of freedom that comes from knowing we are not responsible for carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. We are free to focus on what truly matters, free to trust God's timing, and free to live in the present moment. We are free to rest in the assurance that God is working all things together for our good, even when we cannot see it. This freedom allows us to live with joy, peace, and confidence, knowing that we are held by a God who loves us and has our best interests at heart. God's timing is always perfect, even if it's not ours. In a world that values instant gratification, waiting for the right moment can feel like an exercise in frustration. We live in an age where everything moves at lightning speed. From social media to online shopping, we've grown accustomed to having things immediately, without delay. But when it comes to God's timing, things don't always happen on our schedule. We may find ourselves asking, why hasn't this happened yet? Why is there a delay in my plans? Why does it feel like I'm stuck in these moments? We are confronted with the tension between our timing and God's timing. It's easy to forget that God is not bound by time. Unlike us, he doesn't live according to a calendar or a clock. He exists outside the boundaries of time, and his view of the world is eternal. When God operates in our lives, he is not just responding to our immediate needs, he is working toward a greater purpose that we might not yet see. This eternal perspective allows him to orchestrate events in a way that is perfectly aligned with his will, even if it doesn't always make sense to us in the moment. God's timing is perfect because he sees the bigger picture. We are often limited by our narrow understanding of what's best for us. We may desire something now, but we don't always know what the consequences of having it too soon might be. If we get what we want before we're ready, we might miss out on the lessons we need to learn or the growth we need to undergo to fully appreciate and handle the blessing. There's a reason why certain things happen when they do, and while we may not always understand it, trusting God's timing means trusting that he knows when we are truly prepared to receive what he has for us. Another aspect of God's perfect timing is the way he aligns our lives with the right people, opportunities, and circumstances at precisely the right moment. We might think that a door should open at a particular time, but God knows when the door will open and when it's the right moment for us to walk through it. When we rush ahead of him, we can miss the divine connections and opportunities that he has placed along the way. This doesn't mean that we should sit back and do nothing, waiting for life to unfold. On the contrary, we are called to be active participants in our lives. However, there is a profound difference between working hard toward a goal and forcing outcomes on our own terms. God's timing involves waiting on his lead, trusting that he will reveal the right moments at the right time. Sometimes the reason we struggle with waiting for God's timing is because we don't trust that his plans are better than ours. We think that if we don't take matters into our own hands, nothing will happen, or worse, things will fall apart. This doubt stems from a lack of understanding of God's character. He is not a distant, detached force, but a loving Father who knows exactly what we need. His timing is always rooted in his love for us, and he knows what is good for us better than we do. His delays are not denials, they are opportunities for us to trust in his wisdom and perfect plan. Waiting can be a difficult and painful process, especially when we are in a season of longing or uncertainty. It's hard to see others around us moving ahead while we feel like we are stuck in the waiting room of life. But waiting is not wasted time. It's a season of preparation. It's a time when God is shaping us, refining us, and teaching us to rely more on Him than on our own understanding. We may not always see the work that God is doing behind the scenes, but we can trust that He is preparing us for something far greater than we could imagine. Trusting in God's timing requires patience and faith, knowing that He is working in the waiting. There's a passage in the Bible that speaks to the importance of waiting on God's timing. In Isaiah 40:31, it says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings. As eagles they shall run, and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." This verse doesn't just promise strength in the waiting, it promises renewal. When we wait on God's timing, we are strengthened in the process. Our faith is deepened, and we are equipped to handle the challenges that lie ahead. The waiting is not passive, it's active preparation. God doesn't waste time, and neither should we. He is preparing us for something greater, and every moment of waiting is an opportunity for us to grow in trust, perseverance, and faith. It's also important to recognize that God's timing is not just about us individually, it's also about the people around us. Our lives are interconnected with the lives of others, and God's timing ensures that everything falls into place in ways that will benefit not just us, but also those we are called to serve and support. Sometimes what feels like a delay in our lives is actually God setting up the right timing for someone else's breakthrough. Our waiting might be a preparation for a divine connection or an opportunity to help others when the time is right. God's perfect timing is often accompanied by moments of peace and clarity. When we let go of our own timeline and surrender to His, we begin to experience a deep sense of peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. Trusting that God is in control of every aspect of our lives allows us to relinquish our anxiety and rest in the assurance that He is working things out on our behalf. Peace comes when we stop trying to force things to happen and start resting in the truth that God's plan for us is good and His timing is flawless. This kind of peace is not passive resignation, it's an act of trust. It's the peace that comes from knowing that we are exactly where we need to be in this moment, and that the next step will come when God says it's time. It's the peace that comes from recognizing that our plans may not always align with God's, but His plans are always for our ultimate good. And when we finally see the fulfillment of what we've been waiting for, we can look back and see how perfectly everything fell into place according to God's timing. Waiting for God's timing doesn't mean that we sit idly by. It means that we continue to move forward in faith, doing the work He has called us to do, while trusting that He will reveal the next step when the time is right. It means trusting that He is orchestrating the details of our lives, even when we can't see the full picture. And when the time comes, when the doors open and the opportunities arrive, we will be ready, equipped with the strength and wisdom we need. And we will recognize that God's timing was indeed perfect. God knows the desires of our hearts, and He will fulfill them in His way and in His time. The concept of God fulfilling the desires of our hearts is one that brings comfort to many, especially when life feels uncertain, and we are uncertain of how our dreams will come to fruition. We all have desires, longings that stem from deep within us, whether they are desires for success, love, peace, joy, or even specific goals we've set for ourselves. These desires shape the way we approach life, pushing us forward in pursuit of what we believe will bring fulfillment. But there's a deeper truth that we often forget. God is fully aware of every desire we have, and He cares about them more than we do. What we might not always understand, though, is that God will fulfill those desires in His way and at the right time. We often think of desires as something that belongs solely to us, as if they exist independent of any external influence. But the reality is that the desires of our hearts have been placed there by God Himself. He is the creator of our hearts, and He knows what we need and what we truly long for. In fact, the Bible tells us that God knows the thoughts of man, Psalm 94:11, and that He searches the heart, Jeremiah 17:10. This means that God is intimately acquainted with every longing, every hope, and every dream we carry. The beauty of this is that He isn't distant or unaware of our struggles, but He is deeply involved in the very things we care about. God's understanding of our desires is far beyond our own understanding. Often we view our desires through the lens of our limited perspective based on past experiences, fears, or what we think is best for us. But God sees the bigger picture. He knows how our desires will play out, how they fit into his greater plan for our lives, and how they will impact those around us. Because he is all-knowing, he can guide us toward the desires that will lead to true fulfillment. And he will lead us away from those that might harm us or distract us from our true purpose. When we think about God fulfilling the desires of our hearts, it's important to realize that his way of fulfilling them may not always look the way we expect. We live in a world that often tells us to chase after our desires at all costs, pushing us to pursue our goals relentlessly, regardless of the path it takes to get there. But God's way is not about striving to achieve success on our terms. It's about trusting in his timing and his wisdom. Sometimes the fulfillment of our desires requires us to go through seasons of waiting, testing, and preparation before we're ready to receive what God has for us. God's timing is perfect, and he understands the exact moment when we will be ready to handle the desires of our hearts. If we were to receive everything we wanted immediately, without the necessary preparation, we might find ourselves unprepared for the responsibility or the challenges that come with it. Just as a child may long for something, a toy or a privilege, but is not yet capable of handling it, we too may yearn for things that we are not yet ready for. God, in his wisdom and love, knows when we are ready to handle the blessings he has in store for us. His delays are not denials, but acts of kindness to prepare us for what's ahead. It's also crucial to understand that God's desires for us are greater than the desires we often have for ourselves. Our human perspective is often clouded by what we can see or what we think will make us happy. But God sees the desires that will bring us lasting peace, joy, and fulfillment, things that we may not even realize we need. Sometimes we find ourselves pursuing things that seem good on the surface but are not part of God's ultimate plan for us. God's desire is to give us the best, not just the good, and often that means redirecting our desires toward what truly matters. Sometimes the fulfillment of our desires also involves a change in perspective. When we align our desires with God's will, we begin to understand that his ways are not our ways. His understanding of what will bring us happiness is deeper and more comprehensive than our own. We may long for success, but God may want us to grow in character first. We may long for financial security, but God may want us to learn to rely on him as our ultimate source of provision. We may long for relationships, but God may want to teach us the importance of self-love and personal growth first. In each of these scenarios, God's fulfillment of our desires is not simply about giving us what we want. It's about shaping us into the person he has called us to be, someone who can fully appreciate and steward the blessings he gives. It's also important to realize that God's way of fulfilling our desires might not always come through the means we expect. We often picture a specific outcome and think that the only way to be fulfilled is through that exact path. But God is not limited by our expectations. Sometimes the fulfillment of our desires comes in unexpected ways, through open doors we never saw coming, through people we never anticipated meeting, or through opportunities that appear out of nowhere. Just as God created the world with his boundless creativity, he has the ability to bring our desires to fruition in ways that we couldn't imagine. One key aspect of trusting God with the desires of our hearts is understanding that he is a good father who gives good gifts to his children. Jesus assures us in the Bible that if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him, Matthew 7:11. This promise reminds us that God's desire is to bless us, to fulfill the deepest longings of our hearts in ways that are good, loving, and generous. However, just like a parent who might withhold something from a child until the right time, God sometimes holds back certain desires because he knows that the timing or circumstances are not yet right. Trusting in his goodness and his heart for us helps us to release our anxieties and frustrations, knowing that he will provide for us at the perfect moment. There is also a deeper fulfillment that comes from surrendering our desires to God. When we trust that he will fulfill our desires in his way and in his time, we can experience a peace that surpasses understanding. This peace comes from knowing that we are not alone in our pursuit of happiness and fulfillment. God is with us every step of the way, guiding us, providing for us, and shaping us into the person He wants us to be. When we release our grip on our desires and trust Him fully, we experience a sense of contentment and satisfaction that cannot be found in the pursuit of things or achievements alone. It's natural to desire things, but it's also important to remember that true fulfillment comes from aligning our desires with God's will. As we grow in our relationship with Him, our desires begin to shift, and we start to desire what He desires for us. This is where true contentment lies, when we learn to trust that God knows the best way to fulfill the desires of our hearts, and that His plan for our lives is greater than anything we could have imagined. Through patience, trust, and surrender, we open ourselves to the fullness of God's love and provision, knowing that He will fulfill our desires in His perfect timing and His perfect way. The road to fulfillment often involves seasons of challenges and growth. It is easy to romanticize the idea of fulfillment, imagining that it will come when we achieve certain goals or attain a specific status in life. However, the journey toward fulfillment is rarely linear. In fact, it often requires us to face obstacles, endure hardships, and grow through difficult experiences. These challenges are not signs that we are on the wrong path. Rather, they are integral parts of the process that lead us to a deeper, more meaningful sense of fulfillment. When we encounter challenges, it's natural to feel discouraged or frustrated. We want things to be easy and to move forward without setbacks. But growth rarely happens in comfort zones. It's through facing adversity that we develop the resilience, wisdom, and character needed to handle the blessings that God has in store for us. Challenges are opportunities in disguise, and although they may feel uncomfortable or even painful in the moment, they are shaping us into the people we are meant to become. Think about the process of refining gold. Gold begins as an ore, a raw substance that is impure and unrefined. To transform it into pure gold, it must be placed under intense heat. The impurities are burned away, and the gold is purified. Similarly, the trials we face in life refine us. They reveal what is inside us, our strengths, our weaknesses, our fears, and our beliefs. These challenges help us to shed the parts of ourselves that are holding us back, allowing us to emerge stronger, wiser, and more aligned with our true purpose. In the midst of challenges, it can be easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. We may become so focused on the difficulty at hand that we forget about the growth it is facilitating. But challenges are not random, they are part of God's plan for us. Each trial is a step on the road to fulfillment. And while it may be difficult to understand at the time, we can trust that God is using these experiences to prepare us for something greater. It is often in the hardest seasons that we experience the most significant personal growth, developing qualities like patience, perseverance, and faith that are necessary for our future success. One important lesson that comes from facing challenges is learning to trust God's timing. When we encounter roadblocks or delays, it's easy to become impatient and frustrated. We may feel like we are stuck or that progress is impossible. But God's timing is always perfect. He knows when we are ready to move forward, and He understands when we need to be refined further. Sometimes what seems like a delay is actually an opportunity for us to grow, to learn, or to develop skills that will be essential for our next phase. Trusting in God's timing means surrendering our need for immediate results and allowing Him to lead us in His way and in His time. Moreover, challenges often teach us to lean on God more fully. In moments of struggle, we are reminded of our limitations and our need for divine help. We cannot face life's difficulties on our own strength. But when we turn to God for support, we tap into a source of strength that surpasses our own abilities. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul talks about how he learned to rely on God during times of weakness, stating, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" 2 Corinthians 12:9. It is in our weakness that God's strength is made perfect. Challenges force us to acknowledge our need for Him, and in doing so, they help us grow closer to Him and experience His power in new ways. As we move through difficult seasons, we must remember that fulfillment is not found in the absence of challenges, but in how we respond to them. Our attitude in the face of adversity plays a significant role in our growth. It's easy to become bitter, angry, or discouraged when things don't go our way. But when we choose to view challenges as opportunities for growth, we position ourselves to learn valuable lessons that will serve us in the future. The mindset we adopt during trials is crucial to how we experience them. Will we focus on the difficulty and allow it to consume us, or will we look beyond the challenge and trust that it is shaping us into something better? One of the greatest lessons we can learn in the face of challenges is perseverance. It's easy to give up when things get hard, to throw in the towel and walk away from our goals. But fulfillment rarely comes to those who quit at the first sign of difficulty. It is those who press on, who keep going even when the road is tough, who eventually experience the rewards of their hard work. Perseverance is what enables us to endure through seasons of struggle and emerge on the other side stronger and more prepared for the next challenge. The Bible encourages us to run with perseverance the race marked out for us, Hebrews 12:1, knowing that God will provide us with the strength we need to finish strong. As we endure challenges and continue on the path to fulfillment, it's also important to remember that we are not alone. God is with us every step of the way, providing us with comfort, guidance, and strength. He has promised to never leave us or forsake us, and even when we can't see him working, he is always at work behind the scenes. The journey to fulfillment is not a solo endeavor. God is walking beside us, helping us navigate the twists and turns, the highs and lows, and ensuring that we reach the destination he has planned for us. Fulfillment also comes through the process of learning and growing. Each challenge we face teaches us something new about ourselves, about others, and about God. We learn to rely on God's provision, to trust in his plan, and to develop the skills and character needed to handle greater responsibilities in the future. These lessons are invaluable and form the foundation of true fulfillment. It is the knowledge that we have grown, that we have overcome obstacles, and that we are becoming the person we were always meant to be that brings lasting satisfaction. In addition, challenges teach us empathy and compassion. When we go through difficulties, we gain a deeper understanding of what others may be experiencing in their own lives. This increased awareness allows us to offer support, encouragement, and love to those who are struggling. Fulfillment isn't just about achieving personal success, it's about making a difference in the lives of others. The challenges we face give us the ability to walk alongside others in their own struggles, offering them the same grace and support that we have received from God. While challenges may not always be pleasant in the moment, they are necessary steps in the journey to fulfillment. They refine us, strengthen us, and prepare us for the blessings that God has in store. Without challenges, we would never grow into the person we are meant to be. Instead of avoiding or resenting difficulties, we can embrace them as opportunities to learn, grow, and become more like Christ. With each challenge, we move one step closer to the fulfillment of God's purpose for our lives, knowing that he is with us every step of the way. Trusting in God's plan for our lives requires a deep faith that transcends our own understanding. It's easy to say we trust God, but true trust goes beyond words. It involves surrendering our own plans, expectations, and timelines in order to embrace his sovereign will. We all face moments of uncertainty, moments when we feel unsure of the next step or when we feel like we've reached a dead end. During these times, we have a choice. We can either try to control the situation on our own, or we can trust that God has a plan that is greater than anything we can imagine. Trusting in God's plan is not always easy. We are often faced with difficult circumstances that make us question why things are happening the way they are. We may ask ourselves, why am I experiencing this? Why is life not going the way I expected? It is in these moments of doubt and confusion that trust becomes the most important. Trust is not about understanding everything that is happening around us. It's about knowing that God, in his infinite wisdom, is working all things together for our good. One of the hardest aspects of trust is surrendering control. As human beings, we like to feel in control of our lives. We make plans, set goals, and map out how we think things should unfold. But the reality is that life doesn't always go according to our plans. There are unforeseen twists, turns, and detours along the way that can throw us off course. It's easy to become frustrated when things don't go as we hoped. But true trust in God means letting go of the need to control every aspect of our lives and instead yielding to His guidance. Surrendering control does not mean sitting back and doing nothing. It means acknowledging that while we can plan, work hard, and strive toward our goals, ultimately it is God who is in control of the outcomes. We can't always see the bigger picture, and we don't always understand why certain things happen the way they do, but God does. Trusting Him means believing that He knows what is best for us, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. There is a beautiful peace that comes from fully trusting in God's plan. It's the peace that comes from knowing that we are not alone in our struggles, that God is with us every step of the way. The Bible tells us that God will never leave us or forsake us, and that His love for us is constant, unchanging, and all-encompassing. Trusting in His plan means believing in His presence, even when we can't see or feel it. It's about knowing that no matter what happens, He will guide us through every challenge and every season of life. One of the reasons we can trust God's plan is because He sees the end from the beginning. We are limited in our understanding because we can only see what's right in front of us. We make decisions based on what we know in the moment, but we don't have the full picture. God, on the other hand, sees the entire story. He knows how every detail of our lives fits into His greater purpose. And He has a plan that is perfectly tailored to our lives. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This is the foundation of trust, believing that even in the most difficult moments, God is working for our good. Trusting God's plan also involves learning to wait on Him. Waiting is often the hardest part of trust. In a world that values instant gratification, waiting can feel like a waste of time. But God's timing is perfect. He knows when we are ready for what He has prepared for us. Sometimes the waiting period is a time of growth, refinement, and preparation. During this time, God is shaping us into the person we need to be to handle the blessings and responsibilities He is preparing to give us. Waiting is not a passive activity. It's an active process of trusting that God is at work behind the scenes, even when we can't see the results yet. Waiting on God's plan can also be difficult because it requires patience. In a world where we are used to things happening quickly, patience feels like a lost art. Yet patience is a virtue that is developed through trust. The more we trust God, the more we are able to wait on His timing with confidence. We learn that God's plan is worth the wait, that His timing is always better than our own, and that when the right moment comes, we will be ready. The Bible encourages us to be patient and trust in God's timing, but if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently, Romans 8:25. Another aspect of trusting God's plan is being open to His guidance. God's plan for our lives may not always look the way we expect it to. We may have a vision of how we want our lives to unfold, but God may have a different, more fulfilling path in mind. Trusting in His plan means being willing to let go of our own expectations and allow God to lead us in the direction He knows is best. Sometimes this requires taking risks or stepping out of our comfort zones, but trusting in God's plan means believing that He will never lead us astray. Trusting in God's plan is not just about believing that He will give us what we want. It's about trusting that His plan is better than our own. We might want something right now, but God knows if we are ready for it. We may want something that we think will make us happy, but God knows if it's truly in our best interest. Trusting God's plan means surrendering our desires to Him, knowing that He will fulfill them in a way that is far beyond what we could ever imagine. There are moments when we might feel like we are not where we want to be, or that we are not seeing the results we hope for. In these moments, it's important to remember that God is always working, even when we can't see it. Trusting His plan means believing that He is orchestrating the events of our lives, even in the waiting periods and in the challenges. It's knowing that He is faithful to keep His promises, that He will provide, guide, and sustain us no matter what circumstances we face. Trusting in God's plan also involves learning to embrace uncertainty. Life is unpredictable, and we often don't know what the future holds, but we can trust that God is already there, and that He is in control of what lies ahead. Instead of focusing on the unknowns, we can choose to focus on what we do know, that God is good, that He loves us, and that His plans for us are good. This mindset allows us to face the future with confidence, knowing that we are not walking alone. Ultimately, trusting in God's plan is a choice we make every day. It's a decision to place our faith in His ability to guide us, to provide for us, and to bring us to the place He has prepared for us. It's a choice to let go of our own need for control and embrace the peace that comes from surrendering to His will. Trusting God's plan doesn't mean that life will always be easy, but it means that we can face each day with confidence, knowing that He is with us every step of the way. As we reflect on the importance of letting go and trusting in God, we come to understand that true fulfillment and peace come not from our own efforts or from trying to control the circumstances of our lives, but from surrendering to the divine plan that is already in motion. The challenges we face, the obstacles that seem insurmountable, and the moments of confusion are not signs that we are lost, but are often the very experiences that God uses to refine us, grow us, and shape us into the people He created us to be. Each step, each decision, and each trial is part of a greater journey that, if we trust, will lead us to a place of deeper fulfillment, purpose, and peace. Letting go is not a sign of weakness, but an act of strength and faith. It is the recognition that in our limitations, there is a God whose strength is limitless. It is the realization that while we may not know what the future holds, God already knows, and He has promised that He will guide us every step of the way. Trusting God's plan requires us to relinquish our tight grip on the things we cannot control, acknowledging that His will is always for our good, even when we don't understand it in the moment. This trust is a daily decision, a continual process of surrendering our desires, our fears, and our hopes to God, knowing that He is far more capable of leading us than we are of navigating life alone. As we trust in God's plan, we find that fulfillment doesn't come from the end result alone, but from the journey itself. The moments of growth, the lessons learned through adversity, and the strength gained through trials are just as significant as the destination. In fact, they often shape the person we become and prepare us for the very blessings we've been praying for. When we choose to trust, we open ourselves to experiences that expand our hearts, challenge our perspectives, and deepen our relationship with God. Through this trust, we are constantly reminded that our lives are not our own, but are part of a much larger narrative that is being written by a loving, purposeful God. In every season, we are called to trust, even in the midst of uncertainty. We are called to believe that, despite what we see with our eyes, God is always working behind the scenes to bring about His good purposes. Trusting God means knowing that His timing is perfect and that what may seem like a delay is often God's way of preparing us for something greater. It is easy to become impatient, to demand answers, or to try to rush through the waiting periods of life. But it is in those waiting moments that God is often doing His deepest work in us, preparing us for the next chapter that will require everything we've learned thus far. And when that moment comes, we will be ready not because we forced it, but because we've trusted God to guide us and bring it to fruition at the right time. In trusting God, we also learn to lean into His wisdom and not our own understanding. It is in our surrender that we are given the peace that surpasses understanding. This peace isn't born from circumstances aligning with our desires, but from knowing that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. We can rest in the assurance that God is carrying us, that He holds our future in His hands, and that His plans are always better than our own. The more we trust, the more we experience the freedom of releasing our fears, anxieties, and insecurities to God, knowing that He will take care of us, provide for us, and lead us to where we need to go. One of the greatest rewards of trusting God is the ability to have peace in the midst of storms. Life is full of uncertainties, and we cannot always predict what lies ahead. But when we trust God, we learn to find peace even in the chaos. The storms may still come, but we can stand firm knowing that we are not alone. God is with us, guiding us and holding us close through every high and low. This peace is not something that can be manufactured through human effort. It is a gift that comes from surrendering to God and trusting in His control over all things. As we trust in God's plan, we also begin to experience a deeper level of intimacy with Him. Trust is the foundation of any strong relationship, and as we trust God with our lives, we grow closer to Him. We learn to hear His voice, to recognize His guidance, and to follow Him more faithfully. This relationship isn't built on our ability to understand everything that happens, but on our willingness to walk with God through the highs and lows, to listen to His heart, and to allow Him to lead us in the way everlasting. The more we trust Him, the more we experience His faithfulness, His love, and His grace. This relationship is the ultimate source of fulfillment because it brings us into alignment with the purpose for which we were created. The road to fulfillment and peace is not always easy, but it is always worth it. When we trust God, we embrace the truth that our lives are part of a bigger story. We may not always understand why things happen, but we know that God is good and that He is working all things together for our good. Trusting in God doesn't mean that we won't face struggles or difficult seasons. It means that we don't have to face them alone. God is with us and He will never leave us or forsake us. In Him, we find the strength to endure, the wisdom to navigate challenges, and the hope to continue moving forward. Letting go and trusting God is a journey that takes time, but it is one that is worth every step. It is a process of learning to let go of our need for control, to trust in God's plan, and to have faith that He is leading us to something greater than we could ever imagine. When we choose to trust Him, we open ourselves to His love, His guidance, and His purpose for our lives. The road may be long, but the destination will always be worth it because with God, all things are possible, and He is always faithful to lead us to the life we were meant to live. So let go. Let go of the fear that's holding you back. Let go of the doubt that's clouding your vision. Let go of the bitterness that's keeping you stuck. And trust God because He's never failed and He's not about to start with you. I'll leave you with this: every mountain, every storm, every obstacle, God already has a plan for it. He's already worked it out. Your job isn't to figure out how, your job is to trust Him. Let go. Trust God. And watch what He can do. Thank you